People like to talk about cats, dogs, the occasional bird here and there, bears, but I never really hear anyone talk about plants. Anything beyond gardening. So I decided that I would actually talk about plants because there is some stuff that I think I have evolved from as a kid, and some stuff that I just haven't, and some stuff that I stopped doing that I think I wish I didn't stop doing. So the first thing you need to know is that I'm definitely not a gardener. And when I tried it, nothing ever lived for me past 3 days. And my earliest experience planting something that I can recall is taking a bean, putting soil in it, sticking it in a cup, and leaving it over a weekend. And then I would see some kind of a sprout coming out by Monday at around noon or so. I'm not sure if I'm misremembering what I used. I feel like it was a bean. It's been so freaking long. I just remember that it made me incredibly happy and proud because I thought, oh, okay, so this is what they mean by the seed of life. Outside of that, anything else, my mom would travel and she would leave me in charge to water the plants. Sometimes those bitches would borderline die, even though I was doing exactly what she was saying. As soon as she comes back, they're fine. They are nursed back to health somehow. And I simply did not understand why, what I was doing wrong. My grandma is the kind of person who she can put anything on the ground and it'll always yield. It'll live for a long time. It'll see her grandchildren be born. But me, 3 days is a record. Now my mom, she can usually have like a 70% probability that it's going to work. And I think that most of the time, whatever doesn't work for her is because it might be something that requires a lot of daylight, legitimate, real daylight, not just the stream of light that may make it through the window. We live in apartments, so it's not like we can really get crazy out here. And even if you were to use potted plants, those just don't hit as well as having it actually rooting on the ground. But my favorite thing about my childhood with plants is once I found out that they were alive, I legit started talking to them because I just hoped that somehow, somewhere, someday I would get a response from them because I had so many questions to ask a fucking plant that I never got to ask because, of course, plants don't ever have nervous systems to communicate with people. It's still interesting nonetheless to learn about them, but believe it or not, as much into science as I am, I've never been super wild about them. And I feel that's sad because they're so important. They have such a non-negotiable role in the environment. We take them for granted. And recently, every time I reference things about the environment, such as I used to remember a time when I would go out and ride around town and it was much greener than what we have going on now. Now there's a lot of construction. Every inch of the highway now seems to be chartered to be deforested at some point to make room for stupid retail or housing. Homes that will probably remain empty for some goddamn reason. If I could ask plants a question, I would ask them to tell me stories. Because you guys ever think about how you go to maybe an old house? This is something someone said to me recently. You go to an old place you used to live and you still see the same goddamn tree right there. Can you imagine the stories it would tell? What has it witnessed? What has it experienced, seen, heard, tasted up in the air even? Could it tell us stories about what's happening on the ground? Do you feel snakes? Do you feel squirrels? Do you feel the ants? Has anything ever died on your branches? What is it like for you to shed your leaves, for your branches to break? Does that hurt? A regrowth of any of that, would that hurt? What would life be like if we could actually communicate with plants to the extent that we're used to communicating? And honestly, one of the habits that I wish that I had most often is to go outside into real-ish nature, walk out there, breathe that fresh air, and think as a child. Because sometimes, sure, I see the trees and I'm like, I cannot believe that I'm taking a stroll outside and that they're providing me with shade, blah, blah, blah. But I really don't know that much about plants. If I were to see them out there, more than likely I wouldn't know how to identify them. And I think that's sad because, at least in science classes, it was described how important that was for us at some point, but now in modern days, I honestly don't think that most people know their plants that well. I know most of my squad doesn't. And the ones that they do know is because it's something maybe they have bought before and they saw the label and they're like, yeah, this is a hydrangea. This is a freaking lily. Stuff like that. But outside of that, do you even know anything about them? Where they come from? And what about invasive plant species? I don't usually think about plants as being invasive until I see things with vines spreading out of control. The way that they are competitive too. Some of them keep growing and growing and growing, and some of them stay short and they don't receive as much daylight. Therefore, they may have more deformities, whereas the ones that keep growing and growing, those are the ones stealing the daylight, casting shadows at ground level. What is it like for them to have competition of that sort? What if they could have assemblies like people do? What kind of agreements would they come to? Anything like that. I thought I would ramble about plants because honestly, I'm so ready for spring. When winter starts, sure, the cold is fun and whatever, but I'm excited because I always look forward to spring. Spring has always been the best season for me. Not only do I enjoy things like the weather, the temperature change, and my clothes and stuff, but it's when I seem to get even more thoughtful, more reflective. And maybe it's because since fall/winter sucks so much for me, I get to reflect on how I made it through that. So yeah, it's something I'm looking forward to. And hopefully I'll motivate myself to go out there more often, because that last video that I uploaded of me being outside, that was like the last time I did that. And I was looking forward to the cold weather because I told myself, I can see myself doing this more often. The sun is not gonna be out there so burning and crispy. There's gonna be no bugs and everything, but I have been pretty discouraged lately. But yeah, I thought I would ramble about plants because I can't believe I hadn't done that before. What about you? Are you one of those people who for some reason knows everything about plants? Everything that you ever plant actually lives to tell the story. If you have your own garden, what do you grow? The one tree I would like to have is a stupid palm tree because I like them. You guys remember that video I made about palm trees and how they're resilient? I think they would be super inspiring, but of course it's not practical for me to have those around here. But that would be awesome. My brother planted a mango tree once and it actually grew for him. He planted that mug about 20 years ago, and I remember when it was super, super skinny, and eventually it actually outgrew him, and now it's a legit, fully scaled, full-sized tree. Amazing.